Well, good morning. I hope you're all well and getting ready for the next stage of our journey together. I'm sitting here in my office at home in my sweats, as you can see. Not very professorial, am I? But it's Saturday and snow is still very much in my neighborhood and I'm cold. I want you to know I had a different presentation completed and recorded yesterday. But when I played it back before posting it, I thought, no, this is not what I want. And really, it's not what I think is needed. So I trashed that and spent the rest of my Friday up until I started watching the Olympics asking, well, if not that, Lord, then what? What follows begins with a fairly bold statement on my part, a personal statement. There are probably people who would argue with me about that, but they don't really know me. It is a truth of my life, and I think it will help us transition into the new focus for the first few weeks. Lecture 5, introducing Section 2, Your Spiritual Formation, Pastor. I have lived nearly all of my adult life in response to God's call on my life. It was surprising and honestly totally unexpected call. My family and I were camping out at Diamond Arrow, a family camp of the Church of God in Northern California. It was the last night of the camp meeting. We were leaving in the morning and I was headed off to Baja, California to be part of a Vacation Samaritans work camp in the mountains above Ensenada, Mexico. The evangelist that night at camp meeting was taking his last opportunity to convert everyone present. An extended altar call was taking place. It was the closest to a hellfire and damnation sermon I've ever been part of, and it was really good. But frankly, I was not paying that much attention. In that space, in that place, that location, and in that part of my life, my heart, my head, God spoke to me and said, I want you. I am calling you to follow me into ministry. That was it. After the service, I went back to our tent where my wife with our 3 babies and whispered in her ear, don't tell anyone. But I think I've just been called into ministry, to which she replied, I was just sitting here thinking that. Who needs more confirmation than that, right? I want to be clear about this. I was very, very happy where we were. I was teaching high school English to seniors at Red Bluff Union High School in Red Bluff, California. It was a very good gig. I loved it. I discovered my gifts there. I was good at the job, respected by my peers and reluctantly by my administrators. I was a popular teacher. I still have contact with students from those years back in the late 60s and early 70s. And yes, I'm that old. We were engaged in a local congregation with a very fine pastor who's a lifelong friend. I have often said that I could have spent the rest of my life there. But God spoke. What follows is a series of confirmations by people that were usually begun with an expression of surprise, followed by, well, I can see that. And for the next year, I prepared to leave and go on a journey, the end of which I did not know. But I knew this. I was going to be at least as well prepared for ministry as I was for teaching. So I enrolled at Anderson University School of Theology and moved my very young family from California to Indiana, started seminary, enjoying it greatly, and making friends who would change my life and with whom I would travel right up until this day. And discovered, here's the challenge, within just a few weeks, that this was not it. Pastoral ministry was not that to which God called me. Back in the day, that was kind of it. We thought primarily you were called to be pastor, minister, or missionary. We didn't think about other things really in terms of calling. Things have changed a great deal since then, and I celebrate that. This is why I have said to some of you in responses to what you've written in the course, the destination you think is where you are headed may not be the destination God has in mind. The journey you are on is not necessarily the journey that God has called you to. These statements are best reasons why we continue to pay attention. God doesn't stop speaking. God continues to speak, and we have to continue to listen. I won't go further into the turmoil, the very real turmoil, that discovery, except to say it was great. Turmoil was great and deeply unsettling. I stayed in the seminary through the first semester, left, was fortunate to get a full-time job with the National Board of Christian Education here at Anderson, and began to explore the question, well, if not this, then what? That question led my family and me back to the West Coast a year later to a teaching position at Warner Pacific College in Portland, and the true calling of my life, teaching and the ministry of Christian higher education. That ministry is still my ministry. It's the reason that I am here. It's the reason I am talking to you right now, and the reason that AU thinks I'm qualified to teach this course. It's the reason I worked for 23 years at Warner Pacific College as teacher and administrator. It's the reason we moved back to Anderson for me to work at Warner Press at the end of those 23 years, and the National Board of Christian Education and Church of God Ministries. In all of those positions, all of those roles and titles, my calling has been central to my understanding of my work. It's why even now, as I approach the end of my professional teaching career, that I am asking, what next, Lord? What next? The main point I want to share with you out of this very abbreviated biographical part of my life is that what made this possible was my formation in and through the church. My formation in and through attendance at a church-related college. My formation by mentors, coaches, and teachers who saw something in me that brought them into my life to walk with me. And a sometimes wavering but never forgotten understanding that I am a disciple of Jesus Christ, and my true vocation above and beyond anything else that I may do is to follow where he leads. Thanks be to God. This week, we turn a little corner in the plan for this course. If you look at the calendar, you'll see this heading, Your Spiritual Formation Pastor. You are called by God into God's service. One of the hallmarks of SHAPE, which is a forerunner of leadership focus that Lori Fast, who sits with us, directs, is this. The pastor is more God-centered than church-centered. Let that sink in. A statement that was made that usually surprised and often left people gobsmacked. A standard response to that was, not what my congregation thinks. But if you think about it, you'll see its foundational truth. If you're not in love with God through Jesus Christ, then what are you doing and why are you doing it? In a book I'm currently reading, On the Road with St. Augustine by James K.A. Smith, a book I highly recommend, he quotes Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, who said, "Christianity is not an intellectual system, a collection of dogmas or moralism. Christianity is instead an encounter, a love story." These words hit me right in the space between my head and my heart. Phew. So the discipleship practice of a pastor, the love practices of a pastor who is called to lead the discipleship of a congregation becomes our central concern. How does this part of our journey take place? We need to drill down into the question of discipleship. We need to understand what we are talking about, why it matters, how to maintain it. You have the overall responsibility for the discipleship of a faith community, and consequently, or before that even, you have a responsibility to maintain your own discipleship relationship with the one who called you, that love relationship with God that we have to work at. You have started on this journey already through the assignments in week 4, in which were asked to choose a spiritual practice that addresses you as person and pastor. We will continue by asking you to read select passages from Dallas Willard's The Great Omission. Notice that title, not The Great Commission, but The Great Omission. But the central focus of this week is on your call. I think every one of you has referenced God's call on your life. It's why you're in this course. One of the tragic statements I heard from many pastors in SHAPE was how many had, to some degree, forgotten the story of their call, which next to their redemption, their salvation, should be the greatest story of our lives. The wonderful offset to this tragedy is how powerful it was to tell that story and for others to hear that story and each other's stories and to get inside those stories and rediscover, remember. Powerful and moving these stories were. We were often, all of us, in tears. An AU professor emeritus and deep friend of mine, Dr. Merle Strachey, used to write an article about Vital Christianity, which called us to remember. Jesus calls us to remember. Every time we partake of the Lord's Supper, we are to remember. Remember, member, the act of putting the pieces back together in order to make sense of the life I live now. It is essential that we all remember and live out of the call that is not just a memory, not just a historical event, but an ongoing, living reality of our lives and ministries, without which, well, I'll let you finish that sentence. So now I turn you loose, so to speak, to follow the directions on Read Me First and for the discussion. I look forward with real yearning to hear your stories. And as always, blessings for the journey. God bless you all.